For my capstone project, I will be working with Gilda's Club in Grand Rapids, Michigan, a place that gives free emotional health care to those who are experiencing grief or cancer diagnoses, including children, through a community atmosphere and a variety of events. Thus, my mechanism of change question is, how does grief impact a child's brain, development, and occupations? Trauma is a physically and emotionally harmful event that has prolonged effects on a person's physical, social, emotional, and/or spiritual well-being. Some examples of traumatic events are death of a loved one, divorce, incarceration, violence, and cancer diagnosis. In response to trauma, one can experience grief. Grief refers to the natural response and feelings that emerge after a loss of a person or object. A familiar pattern has suddenly changed. Bereavement occurs after a significant loss, and in my project, it refers to the process of reconstructing meaning in one's life again, as well as adapting to one's new environment. As one feels grief and engages in bereavement, they need to recognize and process emotions while learning how to cope. Coping refers to a set of actions taken to alleviate stress as individuals encounter difficulties. Grief manifests itself differently in children than adults. Children have limited life experiences and are still developing. They often have difficulty recognizing and processing their emotions. They also lack the communication skills required to express their feelings. They are still becoming accustomed to abstract concepts like death and time, and they express their confusion in a variety of behaviors. Children need guidance from adults on how to manage their feelings. The ways in which children cope depends on their developmental level, external support, and relationships, and internal resiliency. Resiliency is the ability to recover and thrive in the face of trauma. It helps children adjust to loss. Children can internalize or externalize their responses to grief. Internalizing looks like clinginess, depression, and isolation, while externalizing materializes in aggression and outbursts. Most importantly, children's immediate and future health are negatively impacted. Without healthy coping mechanisms, children's development may be compromised. Problem behaviors in children are often misinterpreted. They may experience stomach or other physical pain. They may also display a change in appetite. Unhealthy habits may be developed. They may lack interest in leisure and play activities that they used to enjoy. Their sleep patterns may be altered, such as waking up at odd hours or struggling to fall asleep. They may be withdrawn and refrain from social participation opportunities. Other children may act out with aggression and irritability. Different age ranges display grief reactions in different ways, but all reflect their stress and endeavors to cope. Clearly, children react to grief uniquely, with several occupations affected. But why? What happens in the brain that causes them to react in such a way? It all starts with the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal, or HPA axis. Disruption of a relationship activates this mechanism and leads to a stress reaction. The HPA axis prompts the creation of CRH in the hypothalamus and VP. VP has a role in increasing blood pressure by acting on the kidneys for reabsorption of water and electrolytes. At the same time, CRH causes ACTH to be secreted from the anterior pituitary gland. ACTH then triggers the adrenal gland to release cortisol, and this hormone brings about the stress reaction commonly seen in those who are grieving. Normal cortisol levels peak shortly after awakening and is at its lowest between midnight and 5 in the morning. However, due to HPA axis activation, cortisol levels are high in those who are grieving. This results in increased heart rate, stress, and blood pressure. This in turn increases risk for heart disease and morbidity. Impaired sleep is connected to dysregulation of cortisol levels. Some studies have revealed that some pro-inflammatory markers have increased for those who are grieving, while natural killer cells and neutrophils have decreased. This weakens the body and makes individuals more susceptible to infection. Finally, oxytocin is stored in the posterior pituitary gland and is part of the pain and reward systems. It works with the HPA axis to promote stress reactions by increasing heart rate and blood pressure. Oxytocin is an important hormone in forming and maintaining relationships, and this system is altered after the disruption of a relationship. Some individuals even experience broken heart syndrome, which looks like a heart attack but emerges from intense emotional or physical stress. Now let's take a step back to view the whole brain and each part's role in grief or how it's impacted by grief. Each part of the brain is labeled with a shape that corresponds with its name. The prefrontal cortex is at the front of the brain, and it is in charge of planning, decision-making, thinking, and emotional processing. Research has shown that the stress-induced part of the diencephalon alters the effectiveness of higher-level thinking that is done in the prefrontal cortex. Additionally, the prefrontal cortex is not fully developed until the age of 25. Children then are already having a difficult time with making healthy, thoughtful choices. Grief then contributes to their difficulty and results in problematic behaviors. The hypothalamus, also known as the integrator, is supposed to regulate the body's response to stress. As discussed before, it creates CRH, which eventually leads to cortisol release. I did not mark the pituitary gland on this picture, but it would be located close to the hypothalamus. The amygdala elicits a fight, flight, or freeze response and negative emotions. How individuals respond to these emotions varies for each person. The hippocampus is connected to the amygdala as it searches for memories and emotions associated with a threat. The cingulate cortex is vital for attention and focus, as well as processing emotions. When the nucleus accumbens, which is part of the reward system, is activated, it is connected to an intense yearning response that accompanies grief. Research has shown that inhibition of this reward system while experiencing grief can lead to depression. Another study discovered that those with complicated grief often have a smaller total brain volume, which contributes to cognitive decline. The consequences of childhood grief for adults reduces their flexibility and ability to access information from their childhood, as well as raise securely attached children. However, not all is lost. One of the most effective ways to cope is to make and maintain meaningful connections with others, which makes the purpose of Gilda's Club all that more important. Grief and its neurological changes can be explained with the model of human occupation. Moho considers both internal and external subsystems. The internal subsystem is composed of volition, habituation, and performance capacity. Volition is defined as the motivation behind an occupation, which can emerge through feelings of personal capacity, values, and interests. Habituation refers to individuals' participation in patterns, habits, and routines. Their actions are also influenced by internal roles. Performance capacity includes the necessary abilities to engage in occupations, specifically physical and mental factors. These three aspects are impacted by the complex surrounding environment that can either be supportive, inhibiting, or both. In cases of grief, an environmental shift occurs from the traumatic event, such as a loved one dying. This results in a change in each aspect of the internal subsystem. Volition may be exhibited in lost interest, habituation in a change of routines. Emotional and neurological dysfunction fit under the category of performance capacity. This prevents them from effectively participating in their regular routines and occupations. Occupational adaptation, a combination of occupational identity, or knowing who one is as an occupational being, and occupational competence, the ability to fulfill routines and roles, is then lessened, meaning it's more difficult to successfully participate in occupations. Here are my references. Thank you for listening.